How's it going, guys? Awesome Mayo here. And some time ago I was at a gas station standing in line and somebody walked in the door and started talking to the guy in front of me. And the conversation that they had was pretty funny. I don't even know how to explain it, or I don't even know if they knew each other. Nothing, the conversation was just, I don't even know how to describe it. The first guy is like, "What's up?" And the guy in front of me is like, "Just doing what it do, letting it do what it do." And the other guy basically said the same thing. He's like, "Let it do what it do, because that's what it do." And then the guy in front of me replied, only this time he was like a little more aggressive. He's like, "Just doing what it do." And the other guy just like became this competition. They went back and forth like, "Just doing what it do. What it do is what it does. And let it go how it goes. And what it does and what it..." I don't even know how to describe it. But things started escalating. It almost turned into a fist fight. And it was crazy because there was no new information, being transferred. I don't even know how to describe it. It was just like 3 minutes of letting it do what it do and let it go how it goes. And it was like something out of a Dave Chappelle skit. Both the guys are white, by the way. And since then, I've heard people and I've seen stuff online where people say that let it do what it do or let it go how it goes. I still don't really know what that means. But the guy in front of me, the reason I'm telling you this is the guy in front of me, the guy that was in line in front of me, as the line moved forward, he paid for his stuff. And then after he was done paying for his stuff, he did something very interesting. Something that every single real estate investor, business owner, and entrepreneur should pay close attention to because they could profit wildly from it if they just applied the lesson. Today, I'm going to tell you what he did and what it means to your business. Boys and girls, this is how a real estate investor, or really anybody else, it's not just for them, but how a real estate investor can make 3 to 5 grand a week, all just from putting out signs. All right, so awesome Mayo here, and today I'm going to answer a question a lot of people have asked when it comes to putting out signs. Today, you and I are going to cover how a real estate investor can make 3 to 5 grand a week from putting out signs. And again, it's not just real estate investors, but anybody else can make 3 to 5 grand a week putting out signs with no money down, no credit checks, no banks, no loans, and starting with zero experience from nothing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, to start, I should say that the guys and gals on our team have become real artists when it comes to putting out signs. I've had some of the best copywriters and business minds in the world say to me, "Awesome, you guys do this better than anybody else in the world." And I have to say, although I don't want this to get back to the team because I don't want them to get lazy or start resting on their laurels, but I have to say that I agree. The way that these guys have mastered the use of signs, the artistry and obsession that they put into this, it's really unparalleled, and the results speak for themselves. And today I'm going to show you how to not only get your signs out and what type of signs to use, but I'm also going to show you how to keep them up and make sure that those mother grabbers make you money, getting them to spit money into your bank account every day. Now, for most real estate investors or people in general, when you put up a sign in a city, a neighborhood, or even just a yard, it's easy to feel about as welcomed as, a pedophile, right? Well, there is a better way to do it, so that will be you no longer. But the bad news is that none of this will work in your area. It works everywhere else, in all 37 states in America and in every other country, not that any of them matter, but in every other country in the world, this works everywhere else. But it will not work where you are. None of this will work in your area, so don't even try. It's as pointless as recycling. But for the rest of you who this does apply to, let's get started. First, we'll talk about the signs themselves. I recommend neon yellow, not just yellow, but neon yellow signs that are handwritten, actually have writing on them. If you have to sacrifice something, I'd first go with color, because you can get away with white, but you want to make sure the handwriting is actually somebody writing on there with their, it's actual handwritten. So you can use a Marks-a-Lot marker. They're nice and thick, and you can write right on the side. But once you get going, you can send these off to a sign shipper or a sign place and have them recreate your sign. They can recreate your handwriting. They basically take a picture of it and then paste it on the yellow sign. The sign should be about poster board size, not those small city politician signs. Those are okay for directionals, but even then you want to use poster board sign, and definitely for your main signs. So that's the actual sign itself. Now this concept, what we're going to talk about today, I think it was first Sonny who invented this, and then more recently Jen and Millie have had some tweaks to it. So let's imagine Jennifer buys and sells houses, and she has a house that she's trying to sell. Now she's going to use signs to sell her house, but since she's a badass, she's not just going to guess. She's going to get methodical and surgical with her signs. She's going to go gangster. So she's going to do a little basic research on sites like traffic.com. You can also go to your state's Department of Transportation site, go to your local news station. You want to find real-time traffic maps, heavy traffic areas, historical congestion centers. You want to get an idea of where traffic is, and then you compare that traffic to sites like bestplaces.net and Trulia, so you can find not just traffic, but also income averages and income ranges in those areas. So you find out the income of the people in those areas. areas as they go to and from work or whatever. This is a powerful concept because you find out where lots of people with money are going to be, where they're going to be stuck. It's brilliant. And also you can get on your cell phone, and there's so many apps for this. You can go to sigalert.com. You can look up accident and construction zones. Waze has a buddy system that does this. Beat the Traffic is another one. Intrix Traffic, RAC, if you're in the UK and they're starting to spread. Or you could just thug life in and guess, put out some signs and see what happens and then improve it each time. Just test it and then improve. You can also get even more anal about this and search for areas that have recently gone through job loss, like a factory shutdown or something, or areas with higher divorce rates or the most couple counselors. New construction areas where they build new homes because those homes don't have equity. It usually takes 3 to 5 years to sell that home and break even. We also look for areas with high job turnover, high eviction rate, high housing ownership transfers and turnovers, higher crime rates. You get the idea. You also want to stay on top of new developments that come up. So if there's a drive-by or a robbery, or if a whistleblower comes out and tells you that Monsanto's tipping local kids' school lunches and radiation or whatever, you want to be on top of it. Use your signs in accordance. Now, when it comes to headline testing, I won't get into all the awesome, badass ways that these guys have tested headlines, and I'm talking about the headline on the sign, because that's outside of our focus today, but just know, if a sign is in a high traffic area and you're getting eyeballs, it will always pull. Always. So if you're not liking the response you're getting, just change the headline. A better headline will get you better results. So you always want to test that. We've had signs that read, "Don't want to get shot, ? I'll pay cash for your house." Or, "Is he leaving you, ? Mike will buy your house cash." We had a student in Texas that put out signs that said, "My wife is a whore, must sell my house now." So basically it's, letting everyone know, kick me, I'm down. And that house sold in 2 hours, by the way. And when you do this kind of stuff, you can get media attention. Local radio and TV shows can talk about you. People will take pictures of it and put it on their Facebook. All sorts of crazy stuff happens when you get crazy. Also, notice that I didn't just say cash for homes. It's better to use the word I or an actual name like Mike. Or in the case of like mail or on websites, something like, "Hi, I'm Jenny, and my husband Mike and I want to buy a house in this neighborhood." By personalizing it, it helps to humanize you and it increases response. Okay, so aside from that, the basic research on where to put the signs up. And when you get going, this research, by the way, this takes less than 3 minutes to get going. So after that, back to Jen. We're going to vicariously live through Jen here. So after that, Jen goes to the homeowners whose yards are in high traffic areas where she wants her signs, right? She goes to those homeowners and she says, "Hi, I'm selling a house in the neighborhood. Do you mind if I put a sign in your yard for the weekend? I'd really appreciate it." "Hi, I'm selling a house in the neighborhood. Do you mind if I put a sign in your yard for the weekend? I'd really appreciate it." Now that's easy enough to understand and follow, right? Well, if you followed that, remember, the root of genius is simplicity. So when we multiply simplicity and create more and more iterations, that's what creates the masterpiece. In other words, if you understand how to get one sign up, then you know how to get 5 signs up. You know how to get 10 signs up. And if you know how to gain compliance from one person, you can gain compliance from 100, 1,000, 1 million, etc. That's the secret to create an income on demand. Take compliance and transactions on a small level and scale out the result, because the same formula, the same cause, can create a much larger effect simply with more repetition and scalability. What I mean is that in this class so far, if you understand what we've just covered up until now, if you understand what I've already covered, if you understand what you and I have already talked about just up until now, then you know how to make millions and millions of dollars, and this will become more clear as we move along. In fact, you know what? Because I love you guys so much, I'm going to explain this even more. I'm going to go over something that I've already gone over elsewhere, but like I said, it's one of the biggest secrets that I've ever learned. So let me say this before we get started. If you understand what we're about to talk about right now, you will be able to turn any business into a cash cow and build business after business after business after business after business. It's crazy town. So here's the deal. And you definitely want to watch the essay class and the money class. You'll get more on this. We go much more in depth on all this stuff. And actually, you should be going through everything you get from me, because I go much more in depth on everything. But here's a quick refresher just because this is so important. So imagine that this is a straight line. Now in geometry, if we have a straight line that has a defined start point and a defined end point, then we also have a defined middle point or a midpoint. So a Cantor set is when we take a line like this and we take out the middle third. So you end up with 2 lines. Then you do the same thing with each of those 2 lines. You take out the middle third. You end up with 4 lines. Then we take out the middle third of those. We end up with 8 lines, and we take out the middle third of all those 8 lines. We end up with 16 lines. We keep taking out the middle third. The process continues. We keep taking out the middle third of a line, and then we do the same thing with each newly created line. And what you end up with is this. This is called a Cantor set. And it was introduced around the 1880s, so this has been around for a while. Now when you look at this, an interesting thing happens when you zoom in. So let's say we want to take a closer look at this part right here. When we zoom in, what will we see? The exact same thing, right? Because with each new line, the same thing was done. And if we zoom in again on, let's say, this part over here, what do we see? The exact same thing. So this set, what's created is what's called nowhere dense, which we'll talk about later. But this Cantor set goes on on forever. And we see the same thing regardless of the magnification level. In the world of mathematics, this is called self-similarity. You see the same thing regardless of magnification. This also relates to scaling invariance or independent scalability. On planet WBE, we call it badassery because this is how you build an empire. You want to have uniform execution and predictability, and this is how you do it. In order to understand how to do that, how to create that predictability, you have to understand this. You have to understand self-similarity. It's a power whose force is undeniable, and once you learn about this and you start looking for it, you'll see it everywhere you look. You'll see this everywhere you look. It's all around us in nature, for example. Look at something as ordinary as a tree. A tree seems like a simple thing, but it's really a miracle. If it were any taller, it would fall over. If it was any smaller, any shorter, it would wither and die. It wouldn't get the sunlight and nutrients that it needs. But then you look at the relationship between the stump of a tree and a branch, that first branch. That branch is the stump of the next branch, which is the stump of the next branch, which is the stump of the next branch. We see that relationship continuing, and it doesn't end with the last branch, because then you can look at the individual leaves and you see the same pattern of branching in the veins of the leaf. So even in the case of the tree, we see the same relationship present at different magnification levels. And it doesn't end there. We can take it down to a subatomic level. Just think of an atom, for example. You have electrons orbiting a nucleus. Then zoom out and look at the way the Earth orbits the sun. Then zoom out and look at the way the sun and our solar system orbit within our galaxy. We see the exact same relationship repeated again and again. And think of the difference in the magnification that we just went through. From the galaxy all the way down to an atom. The same relationship repeating itself. Even through those dramatically different levels of focus, we see the same pattern. Self-similarity is everywhere. You start looking for this and you'll see it illustrated all around you. It'll teach you this important lesson. The closer you look, the more there is to see. Thinking back to the tree, for example, think about the roots of that tree. A lot of times people think it's a direct mirror of what you see above the ground. That's not really the case. The roots, although they don't have the same biomass as the above ground portion, the roots are about 3 times bigger than the above ground part of the tree. And those main roots each branch out, and then each branch is the root of its own branches, which is the root of its branches, which is the root of its branches. You see that? It continues. That relationship continues. It's like a leaf of a fern tree. You look and you see a leaf, but then you zoom in on one leaf and you see the exact same thing as you do if you looked at the whole leaf. And with that tree, we kept zooming in, but what happens if you zoom out? What do you see then? We've only recently learned what happens when you zoom out of the tree, which is an important lesson in itself, because whether it's opportunity or anything else, the better you get at looking, the more you will see. As humans, as all of mankind, the more we study this process, the more we learn about it, the more examples of this formula that we find. The better we get at looking, the more we see. There are so many more examples and patterns and mathematical formulas that are as old as the earth. But just like opportunity, they're still waiting to be discovered. We just have to get better at looking for them. There was a famous study done by West, Brown, and Inquist, and they discovered something really amazing about the tree. They studied forestation and permaculture and vegetative mapping and all sorts of crazy stuff, and they went to a really dense forest and they took the measurements of a single tree, and they found that the distance between each of the branches, and then the distance between each of the branches, individual branches, and also the differences not just in length, but the differences in size and circumference of, the smaller and smaller, the more we move away from the trunk, the smaller and smaller the branches get, but the difference between those bigger and smaller branches, not just in length, but also in distance. Those distances were the exact proportion of distance between the tree, the whole tree, and the nearby trees. And it wasn't just the distance and length, but the proportion of circumference and size of all the surrounding trees was directly related to what they found on that single tree's branches. Does that make sense? So the difference in the size and distance of each branch on one tree represented the exact difference in size and distance of other trees around it. The arrangement of branches was the same proportional distance of how all the trees in that forest were distributed in relation to that tree. You see what I'm saying? One single tree was a map of the forest that it was in. Every tree was basically like its own little forest. So you could go blindfolded into a forest, pick a tree, and mathematically determine the layout of the entire forest. Isn't that amazing? Something as seemingly random as forest growth. It looks all, out of control and chaotic, but there is a method, and a mathematical, predictable method, whose self-similarity we've only started to understand. It's really just amazing when you look at the tree and all the patterns and recurring properties that we see when we zoom in, but then when we zoom out, we see the same similarity. The same perfectly calculated math that's expressed on that tree is also expressed throughout the distribution and the size of each and every tree in that forest. If you believe in God, this is his signature. Not surprisingly, it also supports the argument the other way. These findings can be used to support God, science, or both. And this concept of self-similarity isn't just in structures in nature, but we see it within ourselves, within our bodies, the rib cage, your spinal column, your lungs, down to a cellular level, in blood vessels and branching in the veins. We see it in social social interactions and engagement. Go to any small town or any small city anywhere in America, or really anywhere in the world. Go to a small town and look at any male adult. He's probably doing whatever his father did, and his son is going to do what he's doing. We see this with income plateaus and the lack of social mobility and how barely anybody ever breaks out of that narrow financial channel that they're in. For generations, people are stuck within a similar income range, having the same struggles their parents had, and passing those same struggles, that same ignorance down to their children, that same financial ignorance I'm talking about down to their children. You absolutely, by the way, have to go through the essay class for more on income ascension, social mobility, and how terrible the data is, and your real hopes of making a difference in your financial status. Even if you're doing really well, a lot of people who are convinced they're doing great are in the most danger. So you want to go check it out. WeBuildEmpires.com, scroll to the bottom. You can watch the essay class. You can download it, have it forever. I go over this stuff a lot more. The essay stuff I'm talking about. And using self-similarity and borrowing from nature to build science and to build your business is not something that I came up with. The smartest people in the world are doing it in a field called biomimicry. It's where scientists copy stuff from nature. And examples of this are everywhere. Take this guy, for example. This is a humpback whale. It's one of the largest mammals in the world, and yet for years nobody understood, even scientists specializing in this, they were trying to figure out why is it that this whale was able to move so well. Its agility was confusing. It would be, imagine if an elephant was jumping around like a cat. Then they realized that this was possible because on the front of its fins were these little bumps, and these bumps made a huge difference. A company named Whale Power started making wind turbines with this same concept. Notice the self-similarity in both cases. The ridges increase lift and decrease drag. It allows for over 20% more efficiency. It can run at lower wind speeds, which has increased the amount of locations that can be powered by these blades, by these turbines. Here's another example from the ocean. This is one of my favorites. If you've ever seen a giant ship, one of the biggest problems they have is that they rot. Algae and other bacteria will eat away at the ship, and over time, decay will make even the most intimidating ship nothing but useless junk. But there's something very interesting about the shark. It spends all its time in the water, and yet algae never grows on it. Even on dead sharks, we don't see algae growth like we do on whales, for example. Well, after careful study of the shark's skin, it was found that they have, on their skin, they have this very unique coating. It has a bunch of ridges, this little isofilm, these tiny little riblets, tiny microscopic structures that make it nearly impossible for bacteria to reproduce and live there. These tiny little ups and downs are a protection. So for bacteria, it's like trying to build houses on a mountain range of ice. A company called Sharklet has developed material based on this pattern. They've used it in emergency rooms. They've used it in surgery rooms for surgical equipment, food preparation, cell phone cases. It's been used for all sorts of different applications. And this special coating can eliminate over 80 to 90% of all bacteria. And this isn't a spray or some fluid or a wipe or some sort of liquid ointment or anything like that. There's no kind of treatment or anything. This is simply the way it's built, with these tiny microscopic grooves that you don't see or even feel with your fingers. And this is what they look like. These tiny ridges are what interrupt bacteria from breeding and living. And in this picture, notice the diamond-shaped pattern. You see that? Well, when we zoom in, we see that those diamonds are made of even smaller diamonds. Zoom in even more, and we see that those diamonds are made of even smaller diamonds. What's this called? Self-similarity, right? And by the way, this process of creating a rough surface so bacteria doesn't get an easy landing, this is the same way that you deal with lazy people or haters, traducers, the naysayers, the LCs, people who want to steal your shine, bruv. And it's also you fight laziness creeping into your own mind and handicapping your dendrites. You create a rough edge that makes it hard to land on or build. And the way you create that rough edge is through questions, but that's a whole nother class. So this may seem like it's unrelated or like it doesn't have to do with putting out science. Everything that you ever get from me, everything that we ever talk about, it's all related. And I really mean it when I say this has become kind of a mantra on our team. You want to create that rough surface. Don't create a smooth surface that allows that bacteria to grow, that laziness to sink in. Give it no oxygen. And if you look at like the shark's the skin, if you look at like the orthographic view, those tiny little bumps are not the same height. It looks more like this. It's like looking at a city's skyline. And by creating that unevenness, bacteria doesn't grow. You know, whenever people say they get frustrated, that's kind of a banned word with our team and our students because it's a choice. You're allowing yourself to settle. Complacency is the enemy. And settling or allowing yourself to get down or being around downers or adopting this attitude of fatalism and defeatism that goes around and can often be found just about everywhere you look. If you look for it and if you allow yourself to look for it and attract it, the way you make yourself immune to that, the way you fight that is to not be that smooth surface. And you create that rough surface with questions. Again, I could talk about this for a lot longer. I'm just saying a lot of times whenever someone starts getting down or they start talking like an LC, one of the first things we say is create that rough surface. Start asking better questions. Nothing will determine your life more than what you think about and what you focus on, what you choose to emphasize. It's just like in the media. Nothing says more about our media than what they emphasize. Your mind is the same way. And nothing will determine what you think about, what you allow to grow, and what you emphasize more than the questions you're asking yourself and the questions you ask others. So anyway, this is a really important thing, and it actually applies to a lot more than just this. And so does everything else we talk about. So just try to, keep that in mind, please, because it can really help. I've seen it work wonders. You got to get better at making those connections, getting smarter, firing those dendrites. Also, by the way, you want to make sure you go through the Devil's Tool class. I go through this much more. That's the class, The Only Reason Why My Students Fail, or whatever the title is. You want to go through it. A lot of people go through it again and again and again. We get a lot of great feedback about it. And I'll tell you, put those things in place and it'll make a big difference in your income. Everything is related. Where one ends, one's output is the next input, right? The output of one iteration is the input of the next. What? Just keep in mind, it's all related, man. All of it. So that was another example. Here's just one more just to make this point. This is a butterfly, and man, the butterfly is a badass. It's like Ali said, float like a butterfly, sing like a bee. This specific butterfly you're looking at right now is a morpho butterfly, and believe it or not, it is not blue. It's not blue. The butterfly has these tiny scales on it, and recently it's been learned that these are like solar cells, and scientists in Japan and China have built solar cells, actual solar cells based on these structures. And these new solar panels are faster, easier, and more efficient than previous ones. So houses and businesses and governments are being powered right now better based on this research. Now, in the case specifically of the morpho, the reason it looks like it does, the reason it looks blue, is because of these tiny structures. It has a layer of these tiny scales or cells. And look what happens when we zoom in. See how within those lines, within those cells, we see more and more cells, and then more cells and more cells. And within those boundaries, we see more and more boundaries. And then within those boundaries, we see more boundaries and more spaces. The closer you look, the more there is to see. And this structural coloration, it's really beautiful, brilliant stuff. So what happens is that light comes in and then it bounces back. And when it bounces back, it bounces off these structures. So it gets bent and reflected on the way out on these layers. So when the light comes out, it looks blue or some other color depending on the angle that you're looking at. So when they flap their wings, they can flash to get attention. But the way that it treats light coming in and then bounces it on the way out, it's like a peacock feather or a big soap bubble. And these cells here in the morpho butterfly are better at reflecting light than any other natural pigment known to man. So companies like Apple and Qualcomm have studied this to build their screens because these scales are basically like little pixels. But when we zoomed in, right, you see the self-similarity, the same process repeating. The point is that self-similarity and biomimicry, self-governing and replicating systems, they're all around us, and it's based on this stuff that you want to build your business. Now, I love talking about this stuff, if you can't tell. And there's a great website that you can go to learn more. It's called asknature.org. You type in a question like, how does a shark clean its teeth? Or how does nature clean water? And you'll get a whole bunch of answers. And then you get examples of scientists who have copied the concept from nature and are using it in real life to help the peoples. So it's pretty cool stuff. Now, at first, the stuff that we've been talking about for the last few minutes is self-similarity, biomimicry. At first, it may seem on the surface or to the uninitiated like it doesn't relate to what this class is about. What the shizzle does this have to do with putting out signs, right? Well, this is all related, directly related. Remember, intelligence is defined as the ability to make connections. The more that you relate information, the better that you do it, and the easier it is to see the connections, the smarter you are. So the better you get at making those connections, the smarter you become. Remember, in your brain, that's what your dendrites do. You fire them and you grow. In your brain, that's what the dendrites do. That's why you want to fire them. You want to grow and nurture them to get smarter and sharper. So I ask you kindly, please, my brothers and sisters, please do not do yourself the disservice of writing this stuff off, and instead get better at making these connections. You know, a lot of times we'll have an intern or a Todd or somebody like that, and as part of our interview process or our screening process, we'll have them go out and find examples of systems in nature, of self-similarity in nature, and then make a connection of how it can help us in business, how it can directly help them. And they don't all do a wonderful job, but the fact that they go out there and they try and that they're enthusiastic about improving this skill, that's the important thing. The oldest business in the world is about 1,000 years old. It's an old Chinese restaurant, I think. It's a family run for 1,000 years. It's a family run restaurant. But think about that, 1,000 years. That means if you're modeling business, if you're building your business after other businesses are using business ideas, which is a brilliant idea, I definitely recommend you do that. But when you're basing your approach on that, on those practices, you are at best modeling after 1,000 years of success, 1,000-year-old track record. On the other hand, when you employ biomimicry, you're modeling over 3 billion years of success. So 1,000-year track record versus a 3 billion-year track record. The choice is pretty obvious. So let's talk specifically about how this relates to putting out signs, for example. It relates to everything, but let's just talk about signs. Let's take what we started talking about earlier, the Cantor set, this right here. So most people will look at this and think nothing of it. They won't appreciate the brilliance behind this. But when you look at this, you should get butterflies. butterflies, right? Get it? Butterflies? Okay. You should get excited about this is the point, because what you're looking at right now, this is like the matrix, the screens of ones and zeros and the black screen with the red or the green text on it, right? This right here that you're looking at, this is how you build your business. This is how you build your empire. This is how you start stacking G's. See, if you had to recreate what you're looking at, most people would look at a section like this and they would start drawing, right? But what they don't know, and what you do know, is that this section here goes on forever. So if you were trying to recreate this, where would you start? You would have nowhere to start, right? So what you quickly realize is that the only way to recreate this is if you understand the formula behind it. And that forces you to focus on the cause of what you're seeing. It's not what you're seeing, it's what created what you're seeing. And understanding that formula and then applying iteration after iteration, that's what creates the masterpiece. Remember, in this case, it's what's called nowhere dense. And I'm going to alter that meaning slightly for our purposes here and put it to you this way. If somebody ever tried to compete with you, the way you're putting out signs, for example, they'll never get the drop on you until they learn your formula. And I can tell you, even if they do, they almost certainly won't do any of this, but they would have to understand the formula, and almost nobody will ever look into that. Even if, let's say, one part or several parts of your business get taken down, or for some reason you lose a certain part of your income, are you really going to be affected? No, not at all, right? Because the formula, the algorithm allows you to build and rebuild. By being nowhere dense, you're nowhere vulnerable, and you can rebuild anytime you want. Remember the formula, we take the middle third out of each line. In this case, that was a formula. It's very simple. But when you build self-similarity correctly, each cell, each set runs as its own business, and it's all based on a very simple formula. One simple algorithm governs every set, and then every set within each set, and then every set within each set. You see what I'm saying? So look at it this way. Let's go back to Jen. And when we talked about her, we understood how to put out a single sign, right? She went and asked somebody in a high traffic area that she had researched if she could use their yard for a weekend to sell a house in the neighborhood. So she's buying and selling houses. She gets a house, and then she puts a sign in a neighboring yard. Now, over time, she can extend the time from a weekend to have the sign out for a whole week, let's say, or even longer, but let's just say a week. And later she can come back and she can maybe buy those people dinner, or pay them based on how many calls she gets or how much money she makes, or she can basically just rent that part of their yard. So that's pretty clear, right? It's easy to see how this can be applied just once with one sign, right? Well, think about what we just learned with self-similarity. If you go through one successful iteration, you can build that masterpiece with just more iterations of the exact same algorithm. So if you take that one line, you take out that middle third, and you keep doing the exact same thing. If you can do it with one line, you can do it with 10 lines or 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000,000. So if Jen got one sign up and then she uses the same process, she can get one sign up, 5 signs up, 10 signs up, as many as she wants. And these are signs in high traffic yards. And then every few weeks, she can come back into that area or that neighborhood every few weeks or every few months. The cool thing is that she has these locations on lockdown. She builds a tight relationship with each of these people. She only targets high traffic yards, and maybe it's more than 5 or 10 signs. Although if they're good locations, she shouldn't need much more than that. And then once we hit our target income, let's say in this case it's 20 grand a month, 5 grand a week, and I'll talk about how to hit that number a little bit later. But once she hits that number, she takes those signs, that package, that group of signs, and puts them in a block. This is going to basically be a set, right? You see what I'm saying? Now she can go deeper in that set, deeper in that area, or she can move on to another area. If she moves on to another, let's say she has 5 or 10 or 15 different blocks, and these are blocks of signs that are creating that target income of 20 grand a month. And if we have, let's say 15 of them, let's say we just have a handful or 2 of them, that means she can go through each one, each block. She can use each block for a week or a few weeks, and then go on to the next block and the next block, and then start over. So each block or each seller has their yard used maybe for a few times a year, for 1 week, a few times a year. Maybe it's every few months. Maybe it's every 3 months, every 4 months, every 6 months. You see how this works, right? If you have, let's say 12 blocks or 12 sets, you can use one every week and then start over. So a seller only hears from you once every 3 months. Or if you use it for 2 weeks, once every 6 months. We basically secure specific locations for signs, and then we do enough to make sure that she makes the amount of money that she wants. And then we're just going to add to the cycle or go back through the cycle. So you either go deeper in each set or you build another set. Either way, you're always creating predictability and regularity of transactions. You get what I'm saying? And remember, to understand all of this, all you really need to understand is just how one sign works, right? By developing the relationship with one person, and by diversifying in different areas and going deeper in current areas, this is how you create what's called income immunity. Whenever you have a money maker, let's say you have a stream of income that's making 20 grand a month or whatever number we have, but let's just use 20 grand a month, 5 grand a week. As soon as that happens, you want to take that income stream and you want to treat it like a baby, right? Like a newborn baby. You want to build high walls with lots of towers and extremely paranoid, trigger-happy guards. And the way that you do that, the way that you secure your income and create income immunity is by stacking policies. You want to stack policies to reinforce a predictable result and stabilize transaction flow. In other words, you want a bunch of different, well-documented ways to achieve a desired goal. So in this case, the more ways you have to get your signs out and the better you are at keeping them up and producing good calls, the more immune your income from them is. Here's another way to think about it. Look at Jen's relationships and how she's leveraging them to get her signs out and keep her signs up, right? Her high-yielding signs up. If you were to compete with her, how would you do it? The real secret is that most people will look at the result, the fact that she's getting a ton of calls and nobody ever tears her signs down, and that's all they'll look at because the untrained are always focusing on the effect, not the cause. They look at the result, not what created the result. But because you're going through my stuff, you understand the cause, you understand the result, right? But just about nobody else will ever figure this out or take the time to figure it out. They won't try to determine the cause because they'll be too intimidated by the result. And for the ones that do, they'll be too lazy to go out and replicate it. Just by the fact that you're taking something simple, putting it through iterations, creating self-similarity, that's what creates income immunity. And this process of income immunity, it's really a brilliant thing. Now, I just want to take a second and re-explain. I mean, this is what we're talking about is creating this. So let's say you go out and you build one set, right? And let's say it's 20 grand a month. You can hire somebody to build the other blocks here. You see what I'm saying? This is why, I don't even use a lot of our student success stories because they sound so outrageous to people who are not in our group, to people that are not my students. But it's a lot easier to go from 20 grand a month to 100 grand a month or 200 grand a month than it is to go from 0 to 20 grand a month because most people are too lazy to get that 20 grand a month in place. But once you do that and you've built it the way that I teach with self-similarity, it's a lot easier to grow your business. And if you get completely wiped out, you can rebuild it in the snap of a finger because you know the algorithm, right? You know the formula. You know what created the masterpiece. And this will become, we're going to get into a few examples in a second. This will become more clear. Let's talk about the actual signs and how we create that income. I know I said that we go over one way to make 3 to 5 grand a week, but since I am something of a superhero, you and I are going to go over a lot more than just one way. In order to determine how to make any amount of money, in this case 3 to 5 grand a week, we need to know how much each transaction is worth. In this case, we're talking about real estate, but this works with anything, by the way. It could be anything. But in real estate, each deal that you do should make you at least $3,000 to $5,000. So the lease options are on the lower side of the immediate profit spectrum. They're the faster type of transactions. But even then, we should make at least 3 to 5 grand, and we should make it fast. So one way to make money from these signs is pretty obvious. Let's say you have a house, and in fact, anytime you ever get a house, you want this process to be triggered so that you can continue to make money from the deal long after and outside the money that you make from the house itself. So you can sell a specific house and then take the leftover business, the leftover buyers, the leftover leads, all those other consumers, and work with them. That's one way. And if you're doing lease options, they should be fast transactions, and you need one a week to be between 3 to 5 grand. That's number one. Number two is one of my all-time favorite ways to make money, not just with signs, but with just in general with anything. It's just so badass. It's called the self-serve. Now, any good student of ours has heard me talk about this before. So in this case, let's say we're going to take our signs and you're going to look for sellers. So your signs would say something like, I'll make a guaranteed offer in your home in the next 24 hours, or we covered a few of the other headlines earlier. So it's going to say something like that. And then you take the replies, and after you pick up, let's say 5 or 10 houses, you use the exact same signs, but you change them for buyers. And then you sell the houses that you just bought using the same signs, but just changing the headline. I love it. So that's number two. And by the way, in the last class I covered, we talked about a student who went out and on his very first day made $6,000 doing this, doing a self-serve with signs. And I don't mean $6,000 in 24 hours. I mean $6,000 on the very first day, as in the first day that he was accepted as a student. That first day before he went to sleep, he had $6,000 in his hands. I'm not saying that's normal or average or that'll happen. I mean, this guy was hungry. He was a nut. He went out, he put out signs for sellers, and then as he was talking to those sellers, he was putting out signs for buyers. It's crazy. As he was talking to those sellers, he was also putting out signs. He was changing the signs for buyers when he knew he was going to have houses. Now, I've had several students have gone out and made money. You can do this right now. Just go out, put out, get something, and then go out and move it to the exact same people you got it from. It's brilliant. And then number three, so that's number two. Number three can be done with the self-serve too. And remember, all the self-serve is, it just means that you're going to use the same pocket of people to serve both sides of a transaction. So they're going to be the buyers and the sellers, and you find them both from the single consumer base, the same consumer base. So number three is that you're going to use those signs, but to handle the calls that come in, you're going to hire somebody to handle the calls. Or more specifically, you're going to reverse hire somebody. Whenever you reverse hire somebody, you're going to pick somebody to do all the work, but instead of paying them, they pay you. So here you're going to reverse hire a real estate agent or an investor to handle the calls. Or it could be anybody else, any other provider, but you're going to reverse hire them and they're going to handle the calls. So a good example of this is an agent that we had, Tom Doss. Now you want to think about this. If you're a real estate agent, you really want to pay attention to this. Or even if you're not a real estate agent, if you just like money, you want to pay attention to this. He went to his broker and he basically said, look, I can get a bunch of buyers and sellers, so let's pick the best agents in this office to handle the business that I'll get. And then I'll take care of everything from there. I'll make sure that they have enough to do. You know, the ones that we pick will have solid business. So let's make sure we pick good people. So he used each block of his signs and then he handed off the work that he got to those agents and they handled everything. Whether they were buyers or sellers, the agents followed up and then he would just get a stack of checks. This is one of our stack of checks models, by the way. You set up a bunch of providers, meet them with the consumer, and then you just sit back and wait for a stack of checks to show up. Now in this case, in order to hit 20 grand a month or $5,000 a week, and I'm telling you this just so you see how attainable this is. To do that, all he needed was 6 calls a week. So if one sign produced less than a call a day, all he needed to do was produce 1 or 6 calls a week, and he was making 20 grand a month. Now his signs were doing a lot more than 6 calls a week, but that's all he needed. Now signs were doing a lot more than 6 calls a week, and he was doing a lot more than 20 grand a month. But the point is that when you get the math down, I mean, how cool is that to know that you only need 6 calls per sign in order to make 20 grand a month? And then when you know, for example, that you need 6 calls per sign, the better you get at getting more signs out and then improving the number of calls, the more immunity that your income has. You get it, right? And you don't have to be an agent either. You can start working with agents, or you can start buying brokerages, or you can go out and get your license and never list a house or take a buyer out and just hire and reverse hire agents. And you don't need your license to do that, by the way. You can reverse hire them to go out and do all the work, and then you get paid. And you can set your blocks up and then iteration after iteration. You see what I'm saying? So those are 3 ways. Number 1, 2, and 3. Those are 3 ways to do this and how to go out and hit 3 to 5 grand a week. And I've had students who've made a lot more than that, doing a lot less than that. They've done a lot less than what I'm talking about now. But guess what? None of those things, none of those 3 items, none of the 3 ways that we just talked about, none of that is what I'm here to talk about with you today. We're going to go over a whole nother way to make 3 to 5 grand a week by doing signs. So back to Jen. Remember her and Millie made some changes on this model that Sunny had come up with? So she's out there. She has these blocks of yards that are bringing her calls, and then she improves and tweaks it so that she gets 5 or 10 or 15 calls or whatever that she needs to make her at least that 3 to 5 grand a week. So we know how much we need from each sign. Now, because she's trained to be a badass, she's always looking for more opportunities. So she goes, let's say, to a busy restaurant. This is something called a revolving door gatekeeper, which basically means they have people coming in and out all day long, people that you want access to. So Jen sees a restaurant. She realizes that a lot of those people are her ideal targets, and almost none of them will ever see her signs. So, and this is the key question here, how can she use her signs to get access to those people? How can she turn that consumer source, that restaurant, into leads for her business and then into transactions and into money and income for her by using her signs? Look at all those people at that restaurant and think about how can she leverage her signs? How can she use her signs, which none of them will see, to do business with that restaurant's customers? Good question, right? Well, here's an example. Let's say this busy restaurant, whenever they give somebody their bill, they'll also include an oversized little card from Jen that will say, what exactly? What will that card say? The same thing as on her signs, right? Basically a mini sign, and depending on whether she wants buyers or sellers, she'll use the appropriate card. And those cards will be handed with every single bill that restaurant gives out. Now, in exchange for doing that, Jen will change her signs to promote a free meal or a Thursday night special or something for the restaurant. You see how this works, right? Both the restaurant and Jen are getting access to a consumer base that they do not currently have access to. You see how this works? You can use those signs to reach a much broader audience than just those signs by themselves will reach. Now, how much money can you really make doing this? Well, I'll give you a few examples. I'll give you a few numbers to think about. Let's say that on average, for every real estate deal that you do, no matter what kind of deal it is, let's say that you make $3,000 to $5,000. That means that you need about 1 deal a week, right? Now, let's say that we're talking about sellers, real estate sellers, people that have a house to sell. And let's say that you need to talk to 15 sellers who call in order to do 1 deal. And let's say that you talk to half the people who call you. So if you get 30 calls in 1 week, you do 1 deal a week, right? 30 calls, you talk to 15 people, you do 1 deal, make it 3 to 5 grand a week. Those numbers, by the way, are pretty awful, but I just want to be conservative. So you need 30 calls a week. Now, let's say that just 5% of the people that get your card will call you immediately. This doesn't include how many people call you later on or how many people you follow up with. That means if your target, that means people that call you immediately, 5%. So if you target nicer restaurants that serve at least 100 people a day, then you get 5 calls a day or 30 to 35 calls a week, which is 1 deal a week, right? On average, by the way, a 6 to 8 hour shift for a waitress, she will usually serve about 50 tables. That's just one waitress for one shift at an average restaurant. You're not going to go to one waitress on one shift. You're going to go to all waitresses on all shifts for the entire restaurant. So 100 people a day is not difficult. Just call up restaurants and you'll see for yourself. The other thing is the card. And remember, the card that we're using, you're going for the kill right now. But if you change that and offer more of an education, like how to sell your home for 10% more than it's worth, or 5 ways to get out of foreclosure, or my husband Mike and I buy and sell houses for a free consumer report on how to sell your home in the next 5 days, any area, any condition, you can go here, call me, go to my website, whatever. When you do that kind of stuff, your response rate will go up usually by several 100%. You're going to get several times the response. You may easily hit your 30 on just that first day. And you get a lot more business because you follow up these people and you build a better relationship, you get more referrals, and all sorts of beautiful stuff happens. But I digress. I want to be conservative throughout each projection here. The point is that once you know your numbers, all you're ever doing is making sure that you adjust your activity to meet your numbers. And you're adjusting it in a policized mechanical approach. That way you create self-similarity with everything that you do. Once you know your metrics and you know your numbers and you know that you have to meet your 3 to 5 grand a week or whatever other target income you have, now you know what to do. And if you're just starting out, you can use the numbers I just went over because they are real numbers, or you can just thug life in and pick a number, just guess and calibrate from there. It doesn't matter if you use restaurants either. It can be with anybody. You can do this with any business, but especially any revolving door gatekeeper. Just look around. Whenever you see a business that has a lot of people coming in and out every day and a lot of people that you want access to, you can work with them. We've had students who've done this with jewelry stores, computer stores, clothing stores. And by the way, whenever you see anybody, anytime you see any business that's using signs or doing any kind of street marketing like that, then you know you've got a deal just waiting to happen. We have a student that did this with tax preparation services. Around tax time, you'll sometimes see them out in the streets in front of the tax place. They've got signs and they've got people out there holding signs. So he did a deal with them and they gave his stuff out to every one of their clients. And during that tax rush time, that traffic time, he was doing over 10 grand a week. What about video game stores? The average age of a gamer today is about 30 years old. One of our favorite peoples in the world is Dwayne X, and he's built an entire empire on video games. He's done well over 50 grand a month from video game competitions that have been solely run on signs and the kind of deals I'm talking about. And that's just from one. He's got all sorts of different things going on. He's a nut. But there's another student he worked with, Charlie Pham, who did the basic approach that we're talking about right now. Signs, promoting the video game store. In exchange, they promoted him to their clients, and he got over 150 leads the first week. He did well over 5 grand that first week and in every week since. But it's interesting to think about that, the video game store, because were there really that many people that came through there? No, there were not. So how did he get that many leads, that much business from a video game store? Well, here's another compliance move. You can have that business that you work with not just go to their current foot traffic. You can have that business that you work with not just go to their current foot traffic, but they can also go to their database of previous customers as well. GameStop, for example, has over 20 million people on their list, 20 million gamers. Other video game stores can have thousands or tens of thousands of people on their list. Now, when you do a deal like this, you really want to make sure that the people you're working with also get taken care of. So you want to make sure your signs produce for them, or you do more signs, or you send out an email to your buyers and your sellers, or you help them in some other way. You make sure that they feel like they got the better end of the deal. This is all about the relationship because, well, first of all, what goes around comes around, but also you want to work with these people later, again and again. Remember, it's the iterations that's important. Whenever you work with someone, don't look at it as a transaction. Look at it as a stream of transactions, regular transactions. You want regularity and predictability with each partner that you work with. So if you think about if you have 10 local businesses and you want to work with them on a deep level. And let's say you work with them for just 2 weeks at a time. Instead of 1 week, you work with them 2 weeks at a time. Well, if you're working with 5 or 10 people, 5 or 10 businesses, let's say it's 10 times 2 weeks, that's 20 weeks, almost 6 months. So these businesses are only going to their clients and mentioning you twice a year, once every 6 months, roughly. And by doing that and making sure you're working with the right people that have enough of a crowd and you're getting enough business that you want, with just 10 local businesses, you're making 5 grand a week all year long. You see what I'm saying? This is why you want to build your cells. You want to build your sets and then build that self-similarity in everything you're doing. Here's another quick bonus here that I didn't mention that I was going to talk about. So this isn't just 4 ways. We've covered 4 ways so far. This is another way. Let's say you work with local companies. We have a young lady doing this right now with KinderCare, just like, daycare centers for kids, where you go to a local business who has a client list that you want to get in touch with, and you put out signs specifically for them. So you're going to grow their business with signs. In exchange, they go to all their people about that you buy and sell houses or whatever, and you You stack your deck with 5 or 10 or 15 people like that. You work with one a month, and then you just repeat the process. So you can put out signs for people and use that as leverage to work with their clients and put together deal after deal after deal. If you've heard of the audio, I just did an audio with Anna, and her numbers the first week she started doing this, just with KinderCare, just with kindergarten, like daycare centers in her area, the first week she did it, she made over 12 grand. I won't say where she's at right now, but it's been over 12 grand a week. You see what I'm saying? It's brilliant stuff, man. It's brilliant stuff, man. Coming back to the video game thing, for example, let's say you're working with 5 or 10 or 15 different businesses just like this. That means you can do one a week and just repeat this cycle. So you only work with one business a few times a year. The bottom line is that whenever a business that's packed, that's really busy, whenever you see a business like that has people coming in and out that you want access to, you can use your signs to get access to all of those people. And once you know your numbers, you know that as long as you get 10 or 30 calls a week or whatever number that is to hit the 5 grand a week or whatever your target income is, it shouldn't be much less than 5 grand a week, by the way. But once you know what numbers they are, you'll always know what ingredients are necessary, and you'll only work with businesses that provide that volume. Easy breezy, right? You know, whenever I do a class like this, I always want to make sure that anybody who actually goes through it, that for everybody, every single person, that they are much better off by the end of it than they were at the start. So if you want to build a business, it should be really clear. It should be clear that you can go out and do this right now. In the case of a JV or a joint venture, that's where 2 or more businesses will introduce and promote each other to their own clients, their own fan base. And in a case like that, it may seem like you have to have your own fan base to start with, but that's not the case. You'll see this if we talk more about one of my favorite examples that we covered earlier. And I know that I say that a lot. I say that, it's one of my favorites, but to be honest, I want to give you guys good stuff. So of course, a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is some of my favorite stuff. So one of the things we covered earlier was when you put out signs for a business, like a daycare center or a video game store. And I don't mean where you change your current signs, but you specifically put out signs for them, and then you go to their fan base and they endorse you. I love doing this. And it doesn't have to be for real estate either. It can be for any business, anything. But let's just talk about this from the perspective of you actually being in real estate. And even if you're not in real estate, you can do this for real estate and just reverse hire someone to do the work. So earlier we used the number of $12,000 from the first week. But let's look at how is that even possible? Let's look at some actual numbers. Let's say the business, in this case a daycare center, has 600 people on their list. Of that 600, if you go to them with something like Jen pays cash for houses and can close fast, or a direct headline like that, you'll probably get a response rate of at least around 3 to 5%. That's on the low end. Now the average response from direct mail is about 0.5% to 1%. So the reason we get such a higher response with these in-person businesses is because the response from any in-person business will always dwarf just about any other type of response. And that's because of the relationship that these people have and the depth of that relationship. If you have a list of 600 people, that may sound terrible compared to a list of thousands or millions, but if you've personally met each of these people and you regularly see them, or in this case, if they're leaving their kids with you, you have a much higher level of trust. And think about when a parent drops their kids off for the day. When they leave their contact information, how accurate do you think it's going to be? How updated is that information going to be? So these things help in getting higher compliance. So of those 600 people, and I'm being really conservative to say that 3 to 5% will be the response rate, but even if we use that, if you go after the active market, it's always going to be lower. But if you broaden that dialogue just a little, like we talked about earlier, and you say something like 5 ways to sell your house by next weekend for more than market value, when you broaden that scope a little, you get a much higher response because you're talking to more people. So your response rate should be closer to 20 to 30%. You're talking to people that are not as narrowly defined as I must sell my house right now. So let's say you end up with just 20%. Out of 600 people, that's going to be 120 leads. But we'll round that down to just 100 leads. Now, when that happens, you'll find out that usually on the low end, you'll be converting about 10% of those people immediately. 10% of those people are going to be deals that are ready to go right now, which is another reason why you should do this, because even if you don't go for deals right now, by getting more people, you will find more deals right now. So out of those 100 people, you should have 10 deals ready to go right now, and then about another 10% over the next 90 days, another 10 to 20% over the next 90 days. We've done this hundreds of times, students and people on our team, and those are very average, but also pretty conservative numbers. 10% immediately, and then 10 to 20% over the next 90 days. Now, we're not even going to talk about that 10 to 20% that comes in later, and we're not even going to talk about what happens to the other people and how to increase that response rate. None of that. We're going to ignore and skip all of that. Let's just look at those 10 deals immediately. If you're doing $3,000 to $5,000 on each deal, that's $30,000 to $50,000. And you should be able to move at least some of those deals within the week, but definitely within the month. If you know what you're doing, it should never take you more than 30 days to move a property. So based on that, 30 to 50 grand within 7 to 30 days. And this is on the low end. You see how crazy these numbers can get? Now, it's important to point this out because I know if I come out and say something like, here's how to make 30 grand in a week, that sounds crazy to people. I know that. I get that. And especially if we're talking about starting from zero. But the reason reason that sounds crazy is because most people, pretty much everybody, always focuses on the effect, on the result, not on the cause. But when you look at the cause, when you follow the math along with me, you kind of, you nod your head along the way, right? Along every step. Because when you see the cause and you see how reasonable those conditions are, you also see how reasonable the result is. But only when you look at it as a result, not when you look at it as just some magical thing that just happens out of nowhere. So that's an example of that deal. Now I want you to think about where we are in this deal. Now I want you to take a step back. Let's just zoom out for a second and look at what we just did. By using signs, we traded a daycare center and we helped some of their clients. We got in touch with some of their clients. We got introduced and we helped some of their clients with a real estate problem they had. So when those sellers call, you want to take great care of them. You really want to make them smile. You want to love these people. Go above and beyond for them. And based on the math, we see that the natural result by doing this, we have a natural result of transactions. And you see how just making 12 grand in that week is pretty low. Now watch what happens when we make those numbers dance. So this is clear, right? When we look at one example, one child care center, that's clear. So if we look at it in terms of a set, it looks like this. One single iteration, right? And the algorithm behind that iteration is real simple. It's just using signs and then helping the clients of that child care center. Now that we know the cause, we're going to take that exact same cause. Remember, we focus on the cause, not the result. We focus on the cause. So we're going to take that same cause and we're going to add more. So let's say we add 10 or 12 other groups just like this, other child care centers. This way, if we work with just one every month, you can consistently hit your monthly target of 20 grand, 30 grand, 50 grand a month, and you just keep working with the same group of people. And if you have 10 to 12, you can work with each one once a year. If you have just 5 to 6, you can work with each one twice a year and hit your numbers of 20 to 30 to 50 grand a month. So if you look at this block that we have here, just by taking that same algorithm, we've created a regular income of 20 to 30 grand a month, or it's probably going to be closer to 50 grand a month as you get going and when we start using realistic numbers. But the really cool thing here is that if you look at the cause of how this entire block is run, and then if we zoom in and just look at a section, or if we zoom all the way in and just look at one single iteration, right, we see the same relationship repeating itself again and again. It's all the same. The way that one works is the way that two works, and it's the same way that all 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 work. We are creating this self-similarity from zero. You see what I'm saying? Now let's say we want to build another set over here and we want to do something totally different, or at least it will seem totally different. Let's say we look at working with video game stores. So you put out signs for them, and the sign says something like video games under $10, or $2,000 Call of Duty tournament, or $3,000 Call of Duty tournament, or $5,000 or $10,000 Call of Duty tournament. Now let's say that when we go to their clients, we're going to get a similar result. In reality, we'll usually have a much larger result or a much better result because they have a much larger fan base. But let's just say it stays the same. We work with one video game store and we have the same kind of results where we get, 50 or 100 or 120 or whatever our lead flow needs to be in order for us to make the money we want. And once you have one successful iteration, one cycle, so you get that group of sellers or buyers and you move 10% of those houses immediately, we won't even count the residual transactions at all. So if we just match the compliance we got from the child care centers, we should be able to hit at least 3 to 5 grand or probably closer to 10 grand a week. Or I shouldn't say a week. It's just in this week right now. We're just looking at one example. And this is if you just move lease option deals and assignment deals, just the quick cash deals. So that makes sense, right? Now, with that successful pass, that successful iteration, what do you do next? We stack the policies, right? We build our set. So we get in touch with 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 other video game stores just like this that match the same criteria. So if you look at it, it looks like this. The same thing is over here, right? Also, in the case of daycare centers, I'm going to tell you something that's pretty nuts. It's a huge secret in that industry that I've never heard anybody say, and I don't think anybody even knows about it. This is just crazy cool, and it's just a really cool way to start making money in this space, or really any space. So a lot of times when we do these kind of deals, we go in and we hang out at the business. We get to know the staff. We get to know the customers and the clients. We get a feel for the culture. It helps to cement the relationship. It'll massively increase your response also because their clients will actually see you there. And it also helps you to uncover hidden gold mines. So one day Millie was at a daycare center and she was helping the kids in and out of the cars, and she started asking people why they were dropping their kids off. What were they going to go do? And a lot of people were going to work or they were going shopping or whatever. But one answer that she kept hearing again and again was that these people with money were also taking ESOL classes. If you don't know, ESOL classes are taught to adults usually, and it's English as a second language. So it's basically a way to help foreigners steal jobs. But the larger point here is that she realized there was a huge opportunity. It doesn't matter that it's ESOL or something else. There was an opportunity there because a daycare center was only being used for a very short period of time. And we could easily teach those ESOL classes from that same location. And if you don't know, there are a lot of groups that have made huge money teaching these ESOL classes and other classes like them. So instead of using signs that just said something like free daycare for a week, Millie changed the signs and started hosting ESOL classes from that daycare center at night and in the afternoons, and sometimes even while the kids were there. So instead of dropping your kids off and going to ESOL classes, you can have your kids in the next room while you're in class. And the results from doing these ESOL classes have been just completely nuts. I definitely didn't expect it to be this profitable. I can comfortably say that you can take the money that a daycare center is making, and we can make them 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much money, sometimes more, just by using their space better after hours and even sometimes during hours. And if you add something like ESOL classes to daycare center, you don't even have to change anything. You don't have to change the setup or anything. You can use those same kiddie desks and kiddie chairs for the ESOL people. They won't have a problem with it. And even if they do have a problem with it, they're not going to say anything. You're not going to hear any complaints because they don't speak English. But it's really the concept here. It's not really the ESOL classes themselves, but the concept here that by being invested, being more emotionally invested, you can learn so many more ways to grow that business than you're seeing right now, than they're seeing right now. And when you introduce something like this, not only can you make more money from growing the business, but remember, your main income source is from the deals that are going to happen from them endorsing you to their fan base. This is just a way that's still going to happen. So this is just a way to, create another oil well. I love this concept of just going in there. It's like Sun Tzu said, opportunities multiply as there are seeds. You got to seize them, man. So again, let's take a step back and look at this. We have the child care center over here. We have the video games over here. And then we have the ESOL trade. Let's just add that over here. But I won't even include any of the money from this because it's not really important to make this point. The main issue that's being illustrated here, the real lesson, is in the iterations. So if we work with multiple ESOL deals at once, this becomes a whole new stream of income. And we can calibrate our numbers and make sure that we hit whatever goal that we aim for. It could be 3 to 5 grand a week, 5 to 10 grand a week, 10 to 20 grand a week, whatever you want. You just adjust the numbers. But by taking this perspective that you're looking at right now, we have 3 entirely independent income streams. And when we look at them as a whole, we're talking about 60, 70, 100 grand a month or more. And I can tell you that if you effectively work with just 2 businesses, even if they aren't childcare or video game stores, maybe they are, maybe they're not. But as long as you improve your approach, you refine your dialogue and compliance, and you track your numbers and your metrics, you can hit 100 grand a month and well beyond. And to understand all of that, all you need to do is understand one, right? Just to understand the framework, understand the cause, understand just how one iteration works. Because whether it's 60 grand, 100 grand, or 200 grand a month, that's only a matter of improving, right? That's just a result of improving the cause. And when we're zoomed out like this, we can see that the way the income and transactions are conducted is based on a relationship, right? Then if we zoom in over here, let's say, what do we see? We see the exact same relationship. Now, what if we zoom over here? We see the exact same thing. And then what if we zoom over here? We see the exact same thing. And what if we zoom in here and look at just 3 deals, the way that 3 units of this work, 3 units within this set, we see the same thing, right? And then if we zoom in even more, if we go down to the core of everything, the original iteration, what do we see? The exact same relationship, the same algorithm of trading signs for endorsements. You see what I'm saying? That's what this whole class is about. The same relationship is expressed at different magnifications. This is the definition of self-similarity. This is why no matter what you do, you should always keep this model of thought at the forefront of your mind, creating and recreating patterns. See, I've been doing this a while. I've been working with people for a long time, and I've had a lot of students, a lot of people on our team, a lot of friends who will go out and they'll do something like this once, and that's good, but it's not great. Doing it once and maybe you make a quick 10 or 15 or 50 or 100 grand, and that's not that difficult to do. Millie and Zach had a workshop a few weeks ago, and it started on a Thursday. Some of you were there. They each got on that Thursday. It started on a Thursday. They each got one of their transaction techs on their team to go out and start that Monday doing this exact model that I'm talking about now. And by Thursday, their 2 guys together, the amount of money they made was over $72,000. 72 grand cash in hand. $72,000. They started on Monday, didn't use any of their previous contacts. $72,000 from Monday to Thursday. It was like Thursday early afternoon. And now they were focusing on the fast liquidation deals, like the lease options and the assignments to investors. And although that sounds impressive to some people, the best students understand that the real genius is in the iterations. It's really not that impressive to make money once, because you can go out and you can do this once, but what are you going to do after that? On the other hand, you can go out and do this once, and after that, just hire somebody, get your team started, hire somebody to go out and build these other sets for you. And then when you hire or reverse hire an agent or investor to handle the deals, you are completely done with this. It's subtractive, and the iterations can go on without your direct involvement. So many people in real estate talk about how they don't have enough sellers in their funnel. We hear this all the time. Well, this is how you make sure you never run out of sellers. You never run out of deals. And again, you can just do it once and then build that immunity, right? Stack your policies, stack your execution. So you build that proper self-similarity. Because if you fail to build that, if you fail to build your sets, you will always be out of business until your next deal. At any given moment, you're just one deal away from being broke. You'll always be fighting for the same tiny part of the market that every other iBuyHomes guy is fighting over. You'll constantly complain about the lack of and think your success is dependent on finding motivated sellers. This process of working with businesses, this alone will keep your deck stacked with deals. Look at the local businesses all around you. They are dollar signs and opportunity everywhere you look. When you see the world this way, you'll know that you'll never be short on deals or homes or sellers, transactions, income, whatever you want. And by building your relationships this way, you're making sure that you continue to get paid. Look at each relationship as a long-term relationship. Talked about Ava Shems before. In 2005, her and her husband started working with Sunny. And in 2010, we did the math because they put this model in place and they work with just a few financial planners. And these financial planners were the same people they started working with in 2005 without ever adding any more financial planners to the group. Just by working with that same group of people, working with them once a week or once a month, picking one and working with them for a week or a month, and then going on to the next one and the next one. And then when they were done, they started back over with that same group that they built a tight relationship with. They didn't add any more financial planners to that mix. From 2005 to 2010, they had made over that 5 years a consistent $22,000 to $23,000 a month. Just putting one set in place did that for them. $22,000 a month for the next 5 years. You know, to a lot of people, this may sound like work, but that's just the LC talking. To the LC, everything sounds like a lot of work. And if you think that, you may also be the victim of tunnel vision or thick-headedness. The LC is allergic to thinking. Here's what I mean. This can seem overwhelming when you think about it, when you think about you, yourself, doing all this. But instead of looking at it that way, consider looking at it like you're doing one iteration and that's it. Anybody can get these signs up once, right? And then you can use the transactions to finance hiring people. You see what I mean? Even if you pay 20, 30, or 40%, you're more than doubling your money every month. And that's how you can build this self-similarity. And you know, I had a very good friend of mine who always told me I was crazy for paying the people on our team so much. And finally I asked him how long his people stick around. And he got the message. You know, some of these guys like Millie and Sam and Zach, I met them when they were basically just out of high school. And when they introduce me or talk about me to their friends, they refer to me as one of their oldest friends, not as their boss or somebody they work with. That's the kind of relationship we build. I heard this quote from Bill Gates once where he said it was such a great gift to know that he could make friends and build businesses with them. It's like John Rockefeller said, a friendship based on business is better than a business based on friendship. You can build your team with people you like and respect and who like and respect you and want you to do better and want to support you while you support them, and build companies together. You can have a lot of fun while you're helping people. It's really great stuff. And when you build your team correctly, you don't need them to be around because it's in your best interest. They need to be around because it's in their best interest. And when he understood that, the friend I'm talking about, he was finally able to stop looking at everything as some gigantic marathon. You just have to run a half mile and do it the way that you want every half mile run. Then you hand off the baton. You get to do this stuff. You get to go through the iterations and improve. And then you get to give somebody the gift of opportunity. And once he did that, he was stuck at about $1 million a year for over 10 years. Once he did this, when he started doing it this way, he broke $5 million in his first year. We had another friend of ours who started in the medical field, and he was just like everybody else, thinking that competition and new laws and stingy doctors were his problems. I showed him this self-similarity, this breakdown. I showed him this on the back of a napkin. And then Sonny and Millie went to work with him, building his business the right way. And he went from 0 to $5 million and then to $20 million. And he later sold that business for over $25 million. And this isn't some imaginary back of the napkin number or fictitious value, the $25 million. This is real world value. The company actually was sold. It was bought for over $25 million. And he still has that napkin. He says that learning this was the turning point. Learning this process was the turning point for him. And I know talking about signs isn't a hot new fad, and a lot of people would prefer me to talk about how to crack Google's latest code or how to make the next Angry Birds app or how to get naked celebrity pictures or whatever. But that's just the point. Signs are ugly. They are basic. They are simple. I mean, this is hood rat stuff, man, and that's just the point. When you understand how to build a business, you can do it with something as simple as signs. And when it comes to the formulas and stuff, I did leave out some stuff with the mathematics when we were talking about the mathematiques. There were others like Julia who developed the concept of using a formula like x plus 1 to plot these points like on a grid. And then there's things like the Mandelbrot set. This stuff goes a lot deeper, but the real point is that when you start looking for the right things, start building your income generators based on the right principles. So the details, I don't want to say they're not important, but it's forgivable to leave them out for now. I go even more in depth into this stuff elsewhere. But when it comes to the self-similarity, and I could keep going about this stuff, by the way. You know, a few days ago, a good friend of ours, Angie, sent me an article in Scientific American. Maybe it was Nature's Scientific Reports, I'm not sure. It had a picture that looked like this. On the left side is the human brain, and then on the right side is the universe. See the similarity? The stuff is everywhere. The same thing expressed on vastly different levels. The brain, inside your brain, and the whole universe. Think about the difference in scale. Inside your brain, inside your head, and then the whole universe. Everything is connected. And you'll see this everywhere. I didn't even talk about all the applications. Just look at a stove. You see those rings around it? What are those rings? Self-similarity, right? An example of this. And the heat through those coils, by using this process, you're able to increase surface area without increasing perimeter. This is how your cell phones and computers and cars, so much technology is built with this same concept. You know, when they say all politics is local politics, this is what they mean. If you can gain compliance with one person, you can do it with multiples of people. And that's actually a big reason why I still do this stuff and I make these classes available. If a voice can reach one person in one room, it can reach an entire room. If it can reach a room, it can reach a house. If it can reach a house, it can reach a street. If it can reach a street, it can reach a neighborhood. If it can reach a neighborhood, it can reach a city. If it can reach a city, it can reach a state. If it can reach a state, it can reach a nation. And if one voice can reach a nation, then one voice can reach, help, empower, shape, and teach the world. That's why we do this stuff. As elementary as it sounds, these guys on our team are really changing lives. I love hearing about it and seeing about this, learning about these experiences that people are having. This is happening every day. And your business will skyrocket the moment that you don't just train people, but you train people to train people. When you help somebody, help somebody. Just a single skill like that, one person, you help one person who goes out and helps one other person. This is where your life will change, not just financially either. And really, what is the point of being in business or making money if you're not helping people, right? You'd be as useless as a vegetarian, and you have to help the peoples. And the more that I have to convince somebody, or the more I have to convince you or anybody else of the importance of helping people or volunteering or making people smile, everybody gets it eventually. But you should put yourself in a place mentally where it's easy for you to see and realize the value in making people smile. Trying to explain this to the wrong person is like trying to read a book underwater on an iPad. And when I was a teenager, my future self sent a machine back in time to protect me, and that machine told me that in the future, the end of the world is not because of the robots that we build, it's the robots that they build. Robots building robots. That's what you need. You have to build Skynet. See, when you look at this, we first looked at a line, right? And the cause of the algorithm was taking 1/3 out of that middle third out of that line. That was the cause. Then when we used signs, the algorithm was trading signs for endorsements. That was the cause. And then we saw that same cause expressed everywhere else, right? That same cause was expressed everywhere else. And then when we zoomed in, even on the microscopic level, right? It's on the macro and the micro. Different levels of magnification. We zoom in and out, we see the same thing. So an entire business could run with the same algorithm, and then multiple businesses could be run with the same algorithm, with the same cause, by creating a simple cause and understanding that it in itself is creating scalability. Like I said, and as everybody knows, I love signs and what they can do. And today, you and I have covered less than 5% of what can be done with signs. But like I said, the point is that when you understand how important the algorithm is and how to build scalability right, you can apply it to signs and build a masterpiece with nothing but repeated iterations. A pass again and again. The output of one becomes the input of the next. It's like plotting those points on a grid. There is genius in simplicity. A good example of this is voice over technology, VoIP. When it first came around, two companies looked at the same issue and they looked at it very differently. One company was Vonage. They were going to use long distance telephone and data cables to let people talk to each other. Now to do that, you needed a box. The customer needed to go get a box, and then you needed an actual phone, and you had to have all these cables and wires. And on the other end, on Vonage's end, they needed to pay for last mile access to homes. They had to have a network of routers and switch maintenance operators. It was crazy complicated. And that's why in their first year, they had to invest and spend so much money marketing it to pay for everything. They spent over $240 million in their first year, and they got about 1 million customers. And their feedback from the customers was terrible. I know, because I was one of them. And they struggled for years because of this. It's a good example of how to do this incorrectly, how to do it wrong. See, the way that Vonage looked at it was that they looked at this. They looked at the whole thing, and they tried to recreate all of it. They tried to recreate what the telephone giants had in the 1980s. And because of that, their algorithm was very, very complicated for both the company and the customers. If you wanted to take this thing around, you had to take not just the phone, not just the jack, but you also had to take the box around. You had to have wired internet. It was nuts. Now, on the other hand, another company looked at this very same issue, and they looked at it very differently. They didn't look at the whole issue, the whole massive complicated thing here. They zoomed way in, and they just looked at how could one person talk to another person. And they realized that if both those people had computers, and computers were already sending audio and video over the internet, so as long as those two people both had a computer, that's all they needed. The company could just make some simple software that takes less than 3 minutes to download, install, and run, so you could be using this thing almost immediately. And in just a few minutes, two people could talk over the computers using nothing but just the hardware on the computers themselves. And those two people could do this no matter where they were in the world. Now, if 2 people could do it, 4 people could do it, then 8, then 16, then 32. You see what I'm saying? Because it was so simple, because the algorithm was so simple, it was easy to spread. And that second company spent 0 money on marketing and almost no money on investing. They had no huge infrastructure, massive overhead costs, or this giant apparatus. They weren't looking at it as how do we go across the nation or across the world or into space. They weren't looking at it like that. They looked at very simple. What would be the simplest cause, the simplest algorithm that we could use? And in that first year, they had over $7 million billion users. The company is Skype. Now, as you know, I love Skype. It's just this amazing tool. It's such an amazing thing. And Skype was later sold for over $2.5 billion to eBay, and then later sold for over $8 billion to Microsoft. But the lesson here is you compare Skype to Vonage or Skype to any of the other people that were trying to get in this space, and you see that Skype focused on a much simpler cause. By zooming way in and working one-to-one and doing that correctly, it would mean that they had built-in scalability. And it's the same thing with your real estate business or anything else, with science or anything. You get to that core algorithm and you'll always be able to create scalable and predictable results. You'll be able to train people to do the same thing. Focus on one person who can lift another. Create one sun that can light just one more sun. You do that correctly once, and you can do that as many times as you want. You'll learn a lot watching people grow. It's like if you have kids. I don't have to tell you this because you know that you'll learn more about yourself watching your kids than you will yourself. And you can learn a lot through this process of lifting people, growing people. This cycle of learning, the learn, lift, and share, this is another algorithm that we've built our team on. All right, anyway, we got to wrap up. All right, let's do a quick recap. First, one very important thing that we talked about was building your business with self-similarity and the elements of biomimicry and self-repeating, self-governing systems. We also talked about the importance of income immunity, which is stacking policies to make sure that you have a predictable flow of transactions and money coming in every week. We also talked about making sure that we build solid relationships with folks where we put our signs and with businesses that we work with, and how to do our research to make sure we pick well-trafficked areas. We also talked about how to make sure that we calibrate our lead flow so that we hit our transaction income targets. Then taking those transactions, that income, and building those high, heavily guarded walls and creating a block or a set that produces income independently from the whole. So every part is a whole and every whole is a part, right? Then we looked at how to pick a business that, let's say you want to work with a business who has clients that you want. That's the first thing, to get better at identifying these businesses, get better at identifying these companies. And we want companies that match one or all of the basic three criteria. First, they have a bunch of people coming in and out of that place, a revolving door gatekeeper. Second, they have a good list of their clients. And lastly, or they're using signs already. Remember, anytime anybody's using a sign, you can take that same sign and go hood rat with it, right? Really turn it into a massive moneymaker for everybody involved. I had a guy one time say to me, awesome, I thought I knew about how to use signs, but when I compare your results with signs to our results with signs, your signs make mine look like the Holocaust. And of course, I was like, come on, man, that's an understatement. No, I didn't say that. I was more like, well, the difference is that the signs actually happened. What? What am I talking about? I don't know. It's getting late. And by the way, I'm part Jewish, so I can get away with it. What am I talking about? What do you guys got me talking about? Stop it. Stop changing the subject. One more thing, by the way. Let's say you don't use signs at all. Let's say you go to a gas station, for example, and you just pay the owner or the manager for a small test, and you pay them for every call or every deal that you do, and they hand out your oversized card with every receipt. They hand it to every customer, or they slide it in front of them like a lottery ticket. So everyone who comes in gets this lottery ticket, basically. This can be a huge moneymaker too, and this is what the guy in front of me at the gas station that I talked about earlier, this is what happened. That's what he did. He was given that card, and the guy read it, and he called the number. Now, maybe he isn't the ideal target, but you never know. It's a huge lesson, though. The greatest deals in the world are never advertised, and this is a killer way to get to them. Imagine if you go to every gas station in a 30-mile radius of your market, and you build a relationship with each of them over time, and you get higher and higher compliance with each iteration. Your sphere of influence grows, and you add more and more immunity to your income. Once you have one gas station that you're working with, remember self-similarity, you get it built and built. Remember, if you can go to one gas station, you can go to all of them. You can monopolize that entire market. You can do this with haircut salons and furniture stores. One of our students, Jackie Brown, has been doing this with furniture stores for a while. They basically trade clients every month or so. The furniture store goes to all their clients for him. And then he goes to all his buyers, so he makes his money with the buyers from actually doing the deals, but then he sends them an email. So even the buyers that he never buy one of his houses that he never works with, he's able to make money with them because he's also mentioning the furniture store. And the furniture store goes to all of their clients. So whenever you see a business, let's say you pick 10 companies in your area, you can get all of their best clients coming to you. In Brown's case, just by working with furniture stores, he consistently does over 30 to 35 grand a month. And what about Randall? Randall, if you remember, was our audio and video guy. He used to handle a lot of our tech stuff, and he had a DJ business on the side, and it was struggling until he started taking the stuff that he learned just from editing our videos and audios together. He took some of that basic stuff and he applied it to his business, and he blew it up, and he started stacking all kinds of G's. And then he applied, he went through the standard process. He applied and was accepted and paid and everything to become a student, a real actual student. The best people that we're looking for are grateful to be able to go through that process. They're grateful to be able to pay. They're grateful for the opportunity and for the chance to create income ascension. So one day he wanted to do a test, so he started working with other DJ companies, local people that were his competitors basically, or people that the LC or the amateur would consider his competitors, and he had them put up this sign at all of their parties. It was a sign that said you could buy a house with no money down, no credit checks, and then they also used another sign for sellers that said, I'll pay cash for your house. Call me for a cash offer today. Now, at parties, who do people always look at? The DJ, right? Who do they go up and talk to with regularity? The DJ, right? And during breaks, in between songs, who can the DJ mention? His sponsors, especially when there's two big signs there from the sponsors. Now, if a group is doing enough, if a DJ group is doing enough parties every weekend or every week or every month, you can hit your numbers from them, just from those signs and from having them mention you at all these parties. Now, you can pay that DJ outright, or you can do something else that Randall did, and with your buyers that you work with, help them schedule a homecoming party and send that business back to the DJ. He never paid out of pocket for any of that business. He did enough business with those buyers and enough parties that the DJs loved him for it. I interviewed Randall about this, and the title of our chat was How a DJ/real estate investor makes over 50 grand a month without going to any parties or seeing any of the houses. It's brilliant stuff. You gotta love it. You guys, you want to get these deals going with regularity like clockwork, but you gotta wind them up, right? You gotta get out there and wind them up. Get micro compliance and then broaden the effect. Expand the boundaries to include and encompass more and more. That's the name of the game. Just like we talked about hiring somebody or reverse hiring somebody to handle the calls, after you go through a few iterations of this, you can hire somebody to do all of this for you. These cells, these individual sets, you can hire somebody to build them out for you. So when you hire somebody to build this and you hire people to handle the business, you can be totally subtracted from the entire situation. In fact, and here's a big secret, I always talk about making 10 to 30 grand a month, but the reality is it should never be less than 30 grand a month. But the other reality is that it's not very much money, right? 30 grand a month really isn't that much money, especially when you consider all the money in America. 30 grand a month is not that much money. At least it's not the way when you look at it in a vacuum as 30 grand a month, right? That's the way the ignorant will think about it. The fact is that it depends on how you make it. I recommend using models, and each one of these models should make you at least 10 to 30 grand a month. And as you build more and more, you don't sacrifice one, you build on top of it. You get better with each one. And then what you end up with is this, the same thing, self-similarity at its best. Everything that we've talked about in this class with signs and with getting your income up to 20 grand a month, that in itself is all part of one set. There's a much larger set on top of that. You see what I'm saying? Each set isn't just making you 10 to 30 grand a month, but it runs independently, autonomously, and the income grows over time. So let's say one day you're minding your own business and your house gets raided by an overzealous and totally out of control government apparatus, and your money is completely and wrongfully taken from you, and whatever tiny funds you're left with are frozen, and you have no money at all, and you're left with bad credit, media vultures in your front yard, and you have nothing, you're left with nothing, and you have to start over from zero after expecting $100 million payday and having your custom cars and TVs and furniture taken, repossessed. So in less than 24 hours, you go from shopping for mansions and Ferraris to not knowing how you're going to pay your bills. If that happens to you, right? I don't want it to happen to you, but it could happen, as you and I both know. If that happens to you, you won't be in the same situation I was, being so ignorant as I was. I didn't know this. Had I known this, it would have changed my life. It's one of the reasons I go so in depth with this stuff when I tell you guys, because I don't want you guys to ever be in the same position. But if that happens to you, if you ever have to start totally from zero, if that happens for whatever reason, then you can rebuild like a badass because you know the simple algorithm. You know the formulas necessary to build and rebuild your income. And you're trained well enough to know that even the most intricate and seemingly complicated masterpiece is always based on a simple algorithm. Learn that algorithm and you'll always have control over your financial masterpiece. And then when you begin stacking algorithms on top of algorithms, you understand that simplicity multiplied is genius multiplied. And before you even ask, no, none of this will work in your area, and yes, it's all illegal, and of course, none of it works in today's market. You gotta love the LC questions, right? And they'll always pat themselves on the back for finding the fly in the ointment, even if they put it there. See, I'm so smart that I know it doesn't work in my area. They'll want you to be awed by how smart they are to not pursue opportunities. Their self-sabotage builds their own ceiling, and they want you to admire the design. Don't be proud of your negativity, brag about it, or expect compliments for it. When you adorn yourself in negativity, don't show it off, because it's not a necklace, it's a noose. Too many people will tie the noose around their own neck and want you to wear matching jewelry. Don't do it. I don't want to wear your matching jewelry. As Hemingway said, I don't want your gonorrhea. Or maybe it was Lil Wayne. I don't know. I always get them confused. You guys, don't let the LC guillotine your enthusiasm. Learn to recognize the difference between a necklace and a noose. Okay, and finally, remember this. Controlling the negativity of the LC is like tying a pit bull's leash to a golf ball. Most people are so happily married to their limitations that they'll wonder why and make fun of you if you are still single. Divorce your limitations. Take their disapproval as a blessing. You can do, get, and become whatever you want. And I mean what you really want, because you are getting, pursuing, and going after the things that you really want. Behavior never lies, so your everyday actions and hunger are always in the shape of your true aspirations. If you're not getting what you want, get out there and get it, man. Make it do what it do. And if you're lucky enough to be watching this and you have a full stomach, a roof over your head, and the godsend of good health, then you've already got an unfair advantage over nearly every human being on the planet, and you're generations ahead of nearly every single person who has ever walked the earth. Now, there may be that voice in your head, the echo of the LC, that says this is too hard, or it's too complicated and you're not smart enough, or it's telling you that you could never compete with awesome male sexual magnetism. And even if one of those voices is right, there is another voice in your head that tells you that you can go out and you can do this. You can make a change in your part of the world. And that voice is telling the truth. Go out there and help somebody. Help some sick kids, some hungry people, starving people. You should want to make money to make a difference. And it doesn't have to be about money. Just help somebody who looks like they need it. Somebody who's looking down or like they need a boost. Give more compliments. Be generous with your flattery. Raise people up. Make somebody feel good. Just make somebody smile every day. And remember, if I'm crazy enough to open the doors and work with students again, if you can convince me that I won't regret working with you and that you're not an LC and all that stuff, and it's a no-brainer, you gotta jump all over it. Okay, that's it for now. Go out there and help somebody. Let me know how it goes. Thank you so much, everybody, for the support. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for you. Until next time, take care, be grateful, and smile more.